Fantasy football season is right around the corner, and it is my job to give out the tips and tricks to help you be a better drafter on draft day and go into your week one ready to go with the best team you can possibly have. From there on out, it's up to you to start and sit the right players. But in terms of what I can provide for you, these are 5 tips to make you a better fantasy football drafter. Roll the intro. The first and most important tip, though it may seem incredibly obvious, but hey, you never know and some people do get stumped by it, is knowing your league rules and league format. That is the most important thing that you could do going into your fantasy football drafts. It's important to know every little detail about your fantasy football scoring and league itself. For example, you may feel a little differently about a certain running back in a standard format versus a half PPR format versus even a full PPR format. And the same goes for wide receivers and how many wide receivers you have to set in your lineups. Some of you will play in a 3 wide receiver format, so you may be more inclined to use an early round draft pick on a wide receiver sooner than somebody that plays in a 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, and 1 flex league. And obviously, of course, those who play in super flex and 2 QB formats are also going to be more inclined to use early round draft picks on elite quarterbacks versus teams that only can start 1 quarterback. It's also extremely important to know who is in your league and knowing what tendencies they have, meaning what players they like, what players they don't like, because you can use that ADP and use the rankings to your advantage. If you know that a certain player is going to be taken a little sooner in a draft despite the rankings, or maybe this person was spited by this wide receiver or running back in seasons past, so they may be less inclined to take this player, even though that is a bad strategy, and we've talked about that in an earlier video. If you know maybe there's like 2 or 3 more teams before your pick comes back to you at a turn, let's just say you may be more inclined to take the more desired of the 2 players and hopefully leave the less desired, whether it's a running back or a wide receiver, for your league mates, knowing that they will not take this player. And though these are niche and certain situations that are not going to always be so common in every single league, it is your job to familiarize yourself with what kind of players your league mates like and don't like. The next fantasy football tip that will help you become a better drafter on draft day is to always prepare for the worst. Always prepare that if your plan A goes wrong, that you have a plan B. And besides a plan B, make sure you also have a plan C and D, just in case the worst possible scenario happens. In fantasy football drafts, it's best to be like water, and it's one of my favorite quotes by Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee once said, "Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless like water. If you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, and it becomes the bottle." It is important in fantasy football to make sure you stay open-minded and you be like water and adapt to whatever environment that you're put into on draft day. You're never going to get every single player that you want in fantasy, and no matter how many times you mock draft, you can mock draft 1,000,000 times. That situation that you're put in on draft day may be unlike any mock that you've done this season. Or maybe you just don't even remember because you did 1,000,000 mocks, you sick bastard. This somewhat ties into the first point as well, because if you know someone in your league prefers maybe like an Isaiah Pacheco over Devon Achane, maybe you'll take Isaiah Pacheco first in hopes that maybe Devon Achane somewhat slides to you or at least has a chance to get to you. But if that doesn't work out, you need a plan B, you need a plan C. You need plans for all different outcomes in your draft. So prepare for the worst. If you're someone that likes the wide receivers early in this year's draft and you go double wide receiver to start it off and you're waiting on that 1 running back that you know you want in round 3 and somebody takes them with the pick right before you, don't panic. Just make sure you have a backup plan. As fantasy football players on draft day, we have to expect the unexpected. Expect things to happen that you could have never possibly predicted would even happen in the first place. That is the key to staying like water and keeping an open mind in when you're drafting your teams. The next tip for staying sharp on your fantasy football draft day is understanding tiers and positional values. It's always hard to say whether player A is better than player B, especially when we're talking about in different positions. But let's just keep it to within the same position. We understand that there are certain groups of players that fall into a tier that's either above or below the rest of the group. And let's use a realistic approach to this. Like we said before, you're heavy on wide receivers this year in the draft, and you miss out on one of the 10 best running backs, because I feel that the first two tiers of running backs, there's probably 10 in total that fall into either tier 1 or tier 2. Now let's just say depending on how many people are drafting in your league, it's the third or the fourth round, and every single player in tier 3 of the running back group falls, and now you're stuck selecting between the next tier 4 players. Instead of reaching for the first guy in tier 4 because you missed out on a lot of those players that had higher value, giving you an example, I feel that once we hit in the drafts, and especially redraft of course, once we hit Kenneth Walker at the running back position, the value tends to drop significantly. So instead of trying to grab the next best available player because we need a running back on our team, whether that's Ramondre Stevenson or Aaron Jones, why don't we take another positional player that has a higher ceiling and better floor than one of these running backs, and hope with our next draft pick we could land somebody that's in the middle of that tier, whether it's somebody like Najee Harris or Jaylen Warren, or maybe you even prefer DeAndre Swift. That's okay too. I would much rather advise you taking a wide receiver, even if you feel like you already have enough wide receivers, just to get a better value at the running back position later. For example, say the best wide receiver available is Terry McLaurin. I think Terry McLaurin is a great fantasy pick. I don't think Ramondre Stevenson is a great fantasy pick. But if we take Terry McLaurin and then hopefully get one of those 3 running backs, Swift, Warren, or Najee, those are pretty good values. I know nobody's going to be jumping up for joy that they got one of those guys, but think about the latter situation where you're taking Ramondre Stevenson and then you're going to end up getting an even worse wide receiver if you decide to take a wide receiver in the following round. You obviously do need a full roster to fill out by the time you walk away from your draft, and you have to feel pretty good about it, but you don't need a full roster in your first 6 picks. So don't be chasing positional needs so early in the draft. Let the draft come to you and take the values as they come across the board. And like we said before, if those 3 guys were the guys you wanted and they all go, you need a plan B. You need multiple backup plans just in case that doesn't even go right for you to begin with. My next tip for fantasy football drafts, and more specifically post-draft, is do not get married to any one specific player on your team, whether it's somebody that's really good or one of your late round dart throws that you swear is going to end up being fantasy relevant in 2024. Of course, you're going to draft studs, and you're probably going to name your fantasy team name something funny based off of one of those players. That's all well and good. But those late round dart throws that you were taking in your draft, don't fall in love with them. Don't get married to the idea that you have to keep these players on your roster. Because as the season goes on in fantasy, there are always waiver wire ads that will help make your team better. And that starts right away in week 1. So instead of being married to the idea that you have to keep one of these sleepers that you drafted, or maybe you spent the 12th round pick on somebody and you're kind of reading reports and it just doesn't feel like you made the right pick, cut your ties early and make sure you take a chance on some of these guys that could end up being waiver wire hot commodities after week 1, and add them right before kickoff starts for the first week of the season. Last season in my fantasy league that I play with my close friends from college and whatnot, someone ended up dropping Devon Achane, and I felt like there was no need to be married to any one of my specific players if they felt the need to drop them, because I feel like Devon Achane's ceiling could be a lot higher than something that is on my bench that I really have no idea if it'll pan out or not. I also made sure before week 1 that I did grab Achane, but I also made sure to grab Puka Nacua as well, because I felt like there was a good chance. Now, I could have been wrong on either one of those, but it's the fact that I'm willing to shoot my shot and try to make my team better before the season starts. It's not about drafting your fantasy football team and sitting back and waiting to see what can I make better, what can I change, what can I add to my roster. It's about always wanting to add to your roster. You can't worry about, whether people play or not. You have to be able to be willing to make the assumptions and take those high risks because it will end up in high rewards. I unfortunately didn't get to grab every week one guy as I wasn't able to grab somebody like Kyron Williams, but if I had the you-know-whats to end up reach and take a chance on somebody like Kyron Williams, now in my league with friends that know what they're doing, I've taken all of the week one waiver wire priority ads last year because I was willing to take a chance on making my team better before the season even starts. And you need to keep that mentality all season long. You have to try to beat everybody to the waiver wire punch so that you could save your fab or you could save your waiver priority. However you do your waiver system, you want to be the first to the punch, and you want to make sure that you're giving yourself the most opportunities to give yourself the best team so you can win a championship. And the reason you want to do this right before week one kicks off is that you want to minimize the chances of somebody in your league noticing and also being able to put in a waiver claim or a fab bid on somebody that could end up being really good, just in case it backfires on you. But always keep your options open with that. And finally, I feel like this one really needs to be emphasized more than the other 4 points, and that's why I ended up putting it at the end, is to be aware of positional trends in fantasy and where they finish, especially the quarterback and tight end positions, as those range of outcomes and finishes over year to year are extremely volatile. Let's talk about the quarterback position in 2023. In 2023, only 4 out of the top 10 quarterbacks carried over a top 10 season from 2022 into 2023. That means 6 of those quarterbacks from 2022 did not repeat their probable expectations in the following season. The only players to repeat from 2022 to 2023 were Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, the 3 most obvious, and then Jared Goff was the 4th. In 2022, again, only 4 out of the top 10 quarterbacks finished top 10 in both 2021, the season prior, and 2022. And that list contained, obviously, the big 3, Mahomes, Allen, Hurts, and then throw Joe Burrow into the mix as he repeated from 2021 to 2022. And then following those 2 seasons, in 2021, 6 quarterbacks, which is a high number, repeated in 2020 and 2021. And the same things follow in the 2020 season when we look back at the 2019 season. 6 quarterbacks out of the top 10 ended up repeating their top 10 status. So by looking at these positional trends, we know, let's just be on the safe side, at least 3 new quarterbacks have to enter the top 10. It's probably more likely to be 4 or 5. But let's just say 3 just to be safe. We're looking for 3 quarterbacks that didn't finish in 2023 to break into the top 10. And just a few off the top of my head that could end up doing it are guys like Anthony Richardson, who ended up being injured, somebody like Joe Burrow, who ended up with an injury, but also CJ Stroud finished 11th and could potentially break into that top 10 spot. And don't forget, we have Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels, 2 rookies, and one of them is probably likely to crack into that top 10 as well. So we have 5 possible candidates, and not all of these guys are ranked as top 10 quarterbacks this year in fantasy. So use that to your advantage, and even if you're going to go ahead and take somebody who has a high ADP, like for example, Anthony Richardson does have a high ADP, and he probably will crack into the top 10 and I think be an elite fantasy quarterback. Knowing that somebody else has to go for the ride with him as well, and it may not be Joe Burrow coming off of injury. It may not be CJ Stroud. It could be somebody like Caleb Williams or Jaden Daniels. So go ahead and take a shot on those kinds of players just in case your first pick doesn't work out for you. You know that you have a shot in getting a top 10 guy because none of these guys were top 10 the season before. And this same level of knowledge should also carry over to the tight end position as well. In 2023, 5 out of the top 10 tight ends finished top 10 in both 2022 and 2023. Looking at the 2022 season now, only 4 repeated from 2021's top 10 finish to 2022. And the same also goes for the 2021 season. Only 4 from 2020 ended up repeating their top 10 status. So we know that there has to be other guys that come for the ride in 2024 that were not top 10 players, but could end up being top 10 players. Whether that's due to injury or work volume increasing or departures of other teammates leaving the offense, which also goes for the quarterbacks as well, personnel changes, all of that goes into consideration. Just a few examples of top 10 tight ends that didn't get to make the top 10 cut last year. Guys like Dalton Kincaid or Kyle Pitts and even Pat Freiermuth should have a really good chance of finishing in the top 10, whether they're projected to be top 10 in your fantasy drafts or not. And don't forget, somebody like Mark Andrews finished 15th in PPR points, so he also has to come for the ride as well if he's going to stay healthy. So basically what I'm trying to say is, don't always look at who finished top 10 and think it's going to repeat, because it's more than likely going to be just the elite guys like Kittle and Kelsey. They're gonna carry over year to year. But it's the other guys that we have to worry about and take advantage of that, because there's going to be guys that nobody's thinking about that could finish top 10 that will finish top 10. For example, I last season was banging the drum that David Njoku and Jake Ferguson were good draft picks. They both ended up finishing as top 10 tight ends. Do I think that those numbers will repeat again next year? Probably not. But you know what? Somebody else has to now come for the ride, just like Jake Ferguson and David Njoku did last year. We need to find new guys that weren't in the top 10 last year that will make that leap into elite tight end status in 2024. I do hope this video was helpful to some of you out there. I'm sure a lot of you were already aware of these things already, but just to be on the safe side, I figured why not make a video about giving some advice to at least help you prepare for what's about to come in your fantasy football drafts. And as always, thank you so much for sticking around and watching this video. If you like fantasy football content and you liked some of the stuff I said in this video, feel free to throw me a like. I would personally really appreciate it. And if you're new to the channel, you like fantasy football content, you like people who upload regularly, yeah, I'm humbly bragging about myself right now, go ahead and feel free to subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it goes a long way in terms of getting my videos out to more and more viewers. Nobody wants to watch the guy that's got 30 subscribers and 50 subscribers on YouTube, so the more people that end up subscribing to the channel, it makes me look like I know what I'm talking about. It makes me look cooler. So I would really appreciate it if you would just subscribe and take the time out of your day to do that. But what are some draft day tips that you, the viewers, have? Maybe you can put me onto some kind of game. Drop a comment below if you have a different type of strategy that I didn't talk about in this video. But again, thank you so much for watching. I'm going to finish up yapping now. My name is Turtle. I'm signing out, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Peace.